Thank you for coming. My name is Keith Wilkins. I am the Escambia County's Deputy Chief for Community and Environment. And other than that, moderating and the location, that's kind of the extent of the county's involvement with this, of just trying to facilitate exchange between the public and sort of the natural resource authorities on the event. So I'd like to welcome you to the fifth of these. This forum started in Apalachicola and has progressed westward to here now to Escambia County. And for this series, this would conclude this round. There is another meeting November 30th at the Okaloosa County Conference Center on Okaloosa Island, Fort Walton Beach, November 30th at 7 o'clock. That's the next scheduled meeting, and there may be some more that are coming online soon. With that, again, thank you. Welcome to the Commission Chambers. We do need to wrap this up by 3:30 because there's a commission meeting following this, and the room's got to get a little bit reorganized. So we'll progress through this fairly quickly, try to leave as much time for question and answers as there are. But at 3:30, please realize we need to end. The forum today is strictly regarding natural resources, the assessments, the cleanup, some recovery. There is some discussions on water quality, fish consumption, those types of items. We're not talking about claims, about the VU program, about economic recovery necessarily, but hopefully ecological recovery. If you do have questions or comments, what we'll do is we'll reverse this over and ask you to come to the podium, state your name, and if you're representing anybody or not, and then address the panel with your questions. So with that, I will let the panel introduce themselves and we'll get underway. Thank you. I don't know who's first.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Floyd Sanders. I'm the Florida Branch Planning Section Chief. I am stepping in for Greg Dyer, the branch director, who apologizes for not being able to be here. And we're definitely trying to make sure that we let everyone know that we're here to stay and take care of anything that we need to take care of. We have a lot of projects going right now, and I will let the next gentleman, Mike Latore, introduce himself. I'm the Florida Branch Planning Section Chief.
My name is Mike Latore, and I'm the Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Technique Team Coordinator. That's not a mouthful. But the acronym is SCAT, S-C-A-T, Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Technology, or Techniques. What we've done since the blowout and the oil on the water, our focus is on shoreline. It was on assessing pre-impact and during the blowout, and then also after everything settled down. They plugged the well. They recovered all the oil on the water, or burned it, or dispersed it, and there was no further threat of impact to the shorelines. That's when we developed plans to how we're going to clean up the shoreline. Okay, so we assessed the beach continually, and we're doing it today. And the assessment technique is an internationally recognized method that wasn't developed just for this spill. It is something that has occurred in many spills, so that there's a consistency on how you evaluate or assess any impacts to the beach, to the shoreline, to the marshland, to the docks and riprap. It's this database that these trained assessors, this group of what we call our SCAT teams that are very qualified and experienced in walking these beaches, collecting the data. Now, all this data is inputted into the database for each segment, so that if we wanted to go back to a certain part of the beach or a certain part of the shoreline, we can go to that identified segment, and we'd have a complete database of how that segment was impacted during the period of this event. We're at the point now where we're looking at cleaning the beach now, or the shoreline, as clean as we can possibly clean it with today's techniques. Now, we have mechanical, we have manual, and there's also natural techniques in cleaning the beaches or cleaning the shoreline. Part of our strategy was to get the shoreline to a level where we have some time to monitor it and see how the weather and the seasons affect what's out there or what's on the beach. Because natural attenuation is a very effective process in bringing the beaches and the shoreline back to its original state. So we're right now at a phase where we've got about every piece of known technology out there working the various shorelines and getting them as polished and as clean as possible, knowing that we're not going to get it exactly where we need it to be at this time. It's going to take some time for this shoreline to get back to the way it was. Time is something hard to define and can't commit to exactly when that's going to be. But it's going to be a continual effort until we ever get to that point. And that's what we're basically doing right now. Now, part of the SCAT team, part of that is to develop the technology or develop the treatments to hand over to operations for them to implement those treatments. And those treatments are a collaborative effort by all the stakeholders, from the federal to the state to BP, as far as what's acceptable treatment. Because there are times when you can overtreat an environmental area that might be more harmful than if you let it sort of naturally recover. So in summary, the SCAT function has been something that has been in effect in assessment of all the shoreline since pre-impact, and it's continued and will continue until we're finally to where we want to be. And I will again mention that we don't know when that's going to be, but it's 100% effort at this time. I will say one thing: there's going to be a period of time where you won't see a lot of activity on certain areas of the beach or the shoreline, and that's not because we're finished. It's a matter of monitoring and seeing how nature is taking care of that. It's the continual plan that in spring we are going to reassess every inch of shoreline again. And some during that, from now until then, some of the beaches, some of the shoreline is going to have been continually worked. Others we're going to put on a monitoring phase, but all of them are going to be reassessed in spring, and new techniques or new development of what happened, assess what occurred, and then develop techniques to see what we can do if something has occurred that we can improve on. So I will conclude that at that time, and I don't know who I should introduce next. John?
Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Patrick Coleman, and I am the Coast Guard's Florida Branch Liaison Officer, and I'm kind of filling in today for Lieutenant Anthony Romero, who is the Coast Guard's Branch Director. He apologizes he wasn't able to make it. Just kind of give you an idea what the Coast Guard's doing. We're here basically two things. The first one is federal oversight. We have about 15 Coast Guard personnel working in Escambia County. And we are on the beaches with the BP crews, monitoring what they're doing and trying to make sure they stay in line with federal laws. The other thing that we do, and it's my main job, is liaison officer. As the branch liaison, I'm a link between the state and the counties and the Unified Area Command over in New Orleans. I can take those issues that the counties have, kind of like an advocate for the counties, and I can get those issues to a high level if need be. We try to manage all of our issues at a local level, but if we can't, then I can get those issues up the chain. So again, about 15 personnel working right here in Escambia County, about 27 personnel, I believe, throughout the Panhandle. And I'll be around after the meeting for questions, and I'll be here for the question and answer session as well.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Daryl Boudreau. I'm the Assistant Director for the Northwest District Department of Environmental Protection. And today I'm going to be speaking to you on NOAA's part first, and I apologize. I'm going to basically parrot what I've heard at the earlier county meetings. So if you ask me questions later on digging into details on NOAA, I probably won't be able to answer it, but I want to say that up front. I'm going to just basically let you know what they've been saying, and any questions you have later, I can always follow up with NOAA specifically to get the answers. But basically what NOAA's been covering is the subsurface out in the Gulf sampling that's been occurring. And the take-home message is they've done thousands of samples out there, and they're not seeing the submerged pockets of oil that people, I think, have in their head. What they are finding is basically clouds, is the way they described it, which is the oil that was dispersed is what has sunk in the Gulf floor. And the way they're detecting it is not through sampling for oil, but looking actually for dissolved oxygen differences. And what's happening is in this cloud of dispersed oil that's on the ocean or the Gulf floor, the oxygen level is lower than the surrounding Gulf water because of the biological activity of the organisms eating the dispersed oil. So what they do is they look for changes in dissolved oxygen, and what they were saying is there are very little changes. For those of you who know about dissolved oxygen, we're talking like a 5 is the Florida standard for healthy water. So when I say small changes, they're talking like running from a 5 to a 4 or a 4 to a 3 as compared to the surrounding water. The other question on dispersants is that we learned from NOAA on I believe in the Walton County meeting, was the dispersants in the fish, and I'm going to let the agriculture gentleman talk about it in a moment, but one of the concerns I want to go ahead and get out there is that the chemicals in the dispersant are not bioaccumulative, meaning they're not like mercury, where if a baby fish eats mercury and then a little bit bigger fish eats the baby fish and so on and so forth till you get to a barracuda, it's not going to bioaccumulate so that they don't have a high concentration. It basically comes into their bodies and then out their bodies, so it's not going to exist in the environment. So one of the concerns that was brought up in an early meeting was what's going to happen, down the road from a long-term perspective. We're going to see this persist in the environment. And based on the answer that we got earlier on that is you're not going to see that from dispersants. Now, that's not to say what the effects are in the Gulf from the dispersant on the micropopulations that are out there. I don't think anyone's going to know what those effects are until we either see them or we don't. Getting to my area, which is water quality that the state has done, since the event started, we took 380 samples of water samples. That started on May 1st and ran through September 9th. Of those 380 in Escambia County, that was 160 samples. And the last sample, of course, was taken September 9th. Of the 160 that were taken in Escambia County and Santa Rosa, so it's basically the same area here, 18 were found to have some levels of petroleum. Those 18 samples the bulk of them were the week of, remember the tropical storm we had that came through? That tropical storm, the way I described it earlier, and it seemed to help me kind of put it into perspective, what we've seen all along is we're not seeing oil get absorbed into the water column. The contamination in the water is the tarball itself, is the mousse, is the sheen. It's not getting absorbed to where if you don't see it, it's there. The way I can explain that is when we sampled during the tropical storm, the first tropical storm we got, we actually did see some contaminants getting into the water column. And the best way to describe that visually is if you take a glass of water, or better yet, if you take a margarita mixer, and you put water in it, and then you put cherries in it, the cherries are not going to dissolve into the water. So basically the cherry is going to be sitting in that water, and unless you drink and get a cherry, you're not going to get the cherry. Now, if you take a blender, stick it in there, or the actual blades, and chew it up and spit it up and agitate it, now that is going to get broken down and absorbed into the water, and you will get it. Well, that's basically, it's kind of a analogy or silly analogy, but I think it kind of gets the picture. That's what happens in those tropical storm situations. Now, we were going to end our sampling at the end of August, but there was another tropical system that came through the first week in September. So we did sample that first week in September, and there were no results picked up in that sampling. We've also done the same for the sand, the sediment samples. And we're seeing the same or seeing the same results where if the sand is dark and you see oily sand, we are getting hits obviously from that, but the sand just adjacent to it that looks clean is clean. So the take-home message from today is if you see oil in the form of tar balls or mousse or stain, stay away from it. It's oil. If you see clean sand, if you see the bright, beautiful, clean beach, then it's clean. Dispersant question. We also sampled dispersants, and in Escambia County, we took 8 dispersant samples, and we did have one trace hit on August 16th. And what we found was what they call DOS, and luckily our ag expert, keep pointing ag, he's Coast Guard. The ag expert will tell you what that stands for, and when he tells you what it stands for, I think you understand why I'm not going to tell you what it stands for, because I tried learning French, and my professor always used to get red-faced because of the way I said it, so I'm just not even going to attempt. But what DOS is a chemical found in dispersant that's also found in pharmaceuticals, paint, and a lot of different products. And we did find a trace amount, and I think the reason that they're sampling for DOS is that it is a component of the dispersant, and it's one of the components that we can actually test for. So I just wanted to pass that out. Last thing I want to talk about, and Keith mentioned the NERDA meeting, which is a Natural Resource Damage Assessment, is going to be November 30th. It's going to be right across the street from the Gulfarium. It's the Gulf Coast Conference Center, I think is the name of it. It's going to be from 7 to 9 p.m. And that is the Natural Resource Damage Assessment, or NERDA, is going to be where we identify the physical and lost opportunity impacts to the state of Florida. And when I say physical impacts, I'm talking seagrass, loss of seagrass, impacts to oyster reefs, impacts to seagrass, impacts to fish, turtles, whatever kind of physical impacts that we can quantify, that'll be quantified. The other thing we'll quantify is the missed opportunities. There was a large segment of the Gulf and the state waters that were actually closed to fishing this summer. Well, that was a missed opportunity for our local folks to get out and fish. So that will also be quantified. Now, the process is that both of those impacts will be documented, and we will then approach BP at the end of this process and try to come to some level of agreement on this was the impact that was to Florida, and they will find a way to basically make it right. And the way that process works is we have experts now that are looking at oysters. We have what we call technical work groups, twigs, and there's an oyster twig. There's a seagrass. I think Shelley's on the oyster twig, if I'm right. And we have brought experts in the field to study and document impacts to each resource, and that information will then flow in and be part of that NERDA process. The other thing is that the public is going to have input into this process. The November 30th meeting is going to be the first time where the public will be, well, actually, this is probably the first time, but we're also going to bring our Florida trustees to that meeting. They'll explain the process in much more detail and depth and present to you kind of where we are at this point in the process, and then solicit your input. After that meeting, we'll be putting together draft list of projects that Florida would like to see as the way to make this right, which could include creating oyster reef, creating salt marsh, putting in crossovers on dune crossovers to access the beach. Anything that kind of gets us back to where normal was will be part of that. And then you, the public, will have an opportunity at these type of meetings, as well as there's a website the federal government's going to set up to take input and display draft documents and solicit comments. So that's all I have for right now, and then we are going to move on to...
You miss it every time. You don't want to say DOS either. I'm Ron Webb. I'm with the Florida Department of Agriculture. Good afternoon. It's good to have y'all here. Talk a couple things. What the Department of Agriculture has been doing. We've been taking over 200 samples as of this time right now. And basically when we take samples, we take our samples from what we call primary processors. Basically that's the boats that bring the fish into the seafood processing plants or the seafood processing houses, wherever it may be in the state. We primarily sample anywhere between here in Pensacola over to Apalachicola right now. However, our inspectors are out this week sampling further down the Gulf Coast in Bradenton and St. Pete and Sarasota. So, we really can't leave those processors out because a lot of fish are migratory. What are we testing for? Right now, we've tested for what we call PAHs. And as of this time, we've tested over 174 samples, and we have not had any samples come back with a positive, what's called a level of concern. So all the samples we've tested, most of them have been basically no detection at all, and just a few have even had a trace. Another reason why we do primary processors is because we can tell with the boat that comes in. Each boat has what's called a trip ticket, and these trip tickets basically tell us where the fish came from, how deep the fish was caught, what kind of fish is on the boat, and how many pounds. And for years, the fishermen have kept those trip tickets, and NOAA also uses that data as well to find out where the fish are and how big they are and where they're being caught. So, let's see. FDA and NOAA, they're the ones that have developed the testing methods for PAHs. Our laboratory in Tallahassee is following the same protocol that they've developed. The FDA and NOAA have also tested for DOS. They've tested over 1,735 tissue samples for dispersants, and only a few showed trace amounts of dispersant, all well below what's called the level of concern, 100 parts per million for finfish and 500 parts per million for shrimp, crabs, and oysters. But none of them have come close to the level of concern. What is DOS? That's the primary element in dispersant that's being tested for, and basically it stands for dioctyl sodium sulfosuccinate. Okay, and if y'all want to know how to spell that, I've got it here on a piece of paper, and I'll be glad to share with you the spelling. What else is Department of Agriculture doing? We have recently, our Commissioner Bronson, he signed an agreement or a memorandum of understanding with BP just a couple weeks ago, which basically indicates to us that we'll be testing and sampling for the next 3 years with a $10 million grant from BP. BP also signed the MOU, which indicates $10 million for the next 3 years. Will also be used for marketing to the public, basically informing the public about seafood safety in Florida. Okay. Who's next?
Okay, I believe at this time we can open it up to questions and answers. Again, I don't know how you guys want to work the microphones there, but since it's being recorded and broadcast, again, I'd like to ask whoever has a question to come up, identify yourself, and then the respondents can find a microphone to speak out of. So with that, I'd like to kick it off with a question first. You referenced, should I get on that side? Daryl, you referenced the natural resource damage assessments with relation to oysters and sort of biological impact. Is there also assessment being done on geomorphological impacts to the beaches, to dunes, and things of that nature, more physical type impacts?
What? Oh, tilted that way. Okay, I get you. Sorry. I'll find out. I don't know that for sure. I know that we are looking at the natural systems, and the beach is obviously a natural system. I do not know if they did a baseline survey of what the beaches look like before the event and then after the event. I'll have to find that out and get back with you.
I'll be happy to start us off so anybody can come. Grover Robinson, the Escambia County Commissioner, no longer chair, as you can see behind you, moved over, but certainly worked with many of you through this process. I guess Keith hit on one of my issues was going to be beach restoration in the NERDA process. Clearly, I think that's one of the most important things in Escambia County. We're pulling up at least 10 tons of tar balls a day, and we're losing sand with other stuff. So clearly, sand issue is a problem, not to mention vehicles that have driven all over, people walking through, picking it up. Beach restoration is going to be one of those things we're going to have to see. Not that some of the other things aren't important, and we're going to continue to work with them. The challenge that I have is a couple of questions as far as testing. I know Keith and I have talked about it, and I was glad to see you talked about crabs. I'm talking about things, oysters, crabs, things that can't move as much as fish that get stuck in it and live there. What are we doing for that, especially in those areas where we know we have submerged oil in the mouth of the pass there at Pensacola Bay? Those are things that I think we'd like to see to know what's going on. Also, I know and I very much appreciate, and I think that's the Island Authority and the Escambia County has been important, just continuing to do testing, and we appreciate UWF, but are we going to be doing any testing right now to know what is the effect of the remnants that are left that we still have in the submerged areas right there at the mouth of the pass. And then finally, I know that that's one of the things that we came to on November 4th in Fort Walton Beach, and all trying to get the counties together to say we expect this submerged oil to be removed. We expect also the tar balls in the sand to be removed, and we need to get those removed. As you know, right now we're in an erosion period, and if we don't get that stuff removed off the sand, it's going to be somebody else's tar ball down the beach somewhere else. So again, I think knowing and understanding what's happening, I know we're working it, we're trying to get it all cleaned up. We would love to see it. It all really needs to be, from financially for us, to be cleaned up by spring, because we don't need to suffer another tourist season. We've suffered dramatically, and we don't want to impact next year's tourist season.
Okay, as far as testing for crab in Pensacola Bay, we've tested crab, oysters, shrimp, finfish from Pensacola all the way to Apalachicola so far. I'm not sure the exact sampling schedule, but I will go back tomorrow and find out what the sampling schedule is, and I'll call you back with when we're hitting more crab from Pensacola Bay. Okay?
Hey, gentlemen, lady, Gene Valentino, County Commissioner. I know it's environmentally based conversation. One of the concerns was last weekend we had the discovery. Liz Castro was kind enough to invite me out on with Mr. Coleman, and we covered some of the Escambia County shoreline. And one of the areas we were visiting was the Pickens Pass at Fort McRae, where there was a new discovery of oil at depth at the ocean floor, 15 to 20 feet, I'm guessing, off the shoreline, right off the leading edge of the runway from Sherman Field. And my question is this since then still an isolated event, or are there any other discoveries of this type that you're aware of? And then I have a follow-up.
First of all, when we say oil, when we're finding these, there's really a sandy mixture of a patty or a ball. There's not really a liquid. It's a solid almost. And yes, we are finding those. We're finding them sporadically, and especially in that area there. The weathering is like the last few days or so. We saw some heavy agitation out there, and that tends sometimes to break that up and to mix it up and bring it shoreside. That's an indicator to us that there is something out there, and that's when we make an effort to find out where that is and what that is, though it sometimes is difficult to find, and it does move around. So it's a moving target, but it is something we're very aware of, and it's something that we're always keeping watch of, and it is an indicator for what we're finding out there.
Yeah, as I wanted to follow up because you indicated what I was concerned about, and that is that this is an ongoing event. This is not a flash in the pan, and we expect more events like this probably in the years ahead. So the real question is, while we trust you in your ability to mitigate the cleanup on the beach, I'm not going to micromanage or suggest one piece of equipment over another, or how, when, and where it would be used. And while I trust the dispersants really were not used in the Florida shoreline, as many people feared it was. And while I trust there's an ongoing effort and you're really not leaving us, my real concern is the oil that remains at depth at sea. And can anyone expound on what will continue to be the need to be proactive in getting it at sea before it even, so we don't have to worry about cleaning up the beach in the first place, because we're doing something more aggressive at sea to protect that. And then the final question is, I appreciate the advertising dollars for keeping the public informed on the viability of eating shellfish, but how about the economic incentives to getting businesses back on underway?
So, Commissioner, I'm going to start off and then have other people chime in. So, as you know, all along, we've been working really closely with Coast Guard, EPA, and NOAA to continue testing. And this is an event that happened at a magnitude that we haven't seen before. So, it is going to take ongoing monitoring. And I think what you've seen here is as soon as we find something, as soon as a community member calls in, they've seen oil on the shore, we send teams out to go out and recover that and look at that. And we'll continue to do that going forward. As far as long-term testing, I will mention that in addition to the money that was given to the Department of Agriculture for seafood testing, we've also given $500 million through the Gulf Research Institute, and that included a $10 million grant to the Florida Institute of Oceanography. So we'll continue doing that. And then I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what operations are that you're doing right now.
Just, excuse me, Liz, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. I'm Liz Castor with VP Government and Public Affairs.
All right, as to the current ongoing operations, right now, kind of one of the highlights is definitely Broncos Beach. Everyone knows that we have a delineated tar mat out there, and we are going forth with starting the recovery of that here very shortly. We have turbidity curtains on the way in, and as soon as they're in, then we will definitely be full steam ahead on getting that out of the water. As to all the future sampling, the environmental team and the sampling teams are coming up with the exact methods, be it vibra coring, piston coring, or what have you, in order to go through and make sure that all these suspect areas are indeed not only sampled but fingerprinted, and then a plan of action can be put into place for those. And it is definitely the intent that any of them that comes up, we're going to take care of. It's not even a question really, it's just a when it happens, we do it. As far as the other concern, as far as on the beach and the machinery that we're using, we do have numerous power screens that have come in, and we are working on getting that buried product really that's out there, and we're going after it as fast as we can to get it done as rapidly as possible. You're noticing a ramp up in heavy machinery. You're noticing ramp ups in the amount of traffic on the beach itself, and that's all to get it done faster, to go, I don't know, to really just ramp up our recovery rate out there and to really get it done as we go. In addition, there's testing on surf washing and a number of other things. We were also prioritizing, based on the community input, we're prioritizing all the amenity beaches first to make sure that we're definitely out of those areas as rapidly as possible, and out of the high visibility areas as rapidly as possible. We're working with the National Park Service and the current STRs that are being developed there to get those beaches and the state parks and just everything else picked up efficiently as possible. So we're definitely full steam ahead, and as it comes, we will definitely address it.
Yeah, just keep writing. I'm not sure. I think Daryl's might be a state question. Is anybody still sampling the inland water quality in the areas like Fort Barrancas or Barrancas Beach, or maybe even further inland, or Fort McRae, Fort Pickens, where we have seen some of that submerged oil? Is there still water quality sampling going in those areas, and is there more planned?
Commissioner Robinson's question. The answer is yes, we did sample the oil mat out of Fort McRae. Am I close enough, you guys? Yes, so. We did sample it several weeks ago or a month ago. We did take samples, and it basically confirmed the same thing that we'd seen all along, which is the oil itself, yes, it's oil, it's contaminated, it's a contaminant. We also sampled, I think, 150 yards away, there was nothing. So it's and then we sampled, I think, in proximity. I'm not sure exactly how far. I can shoot you the results that we got. But basically, the oil itself, absolutely, it's contaminated. I wouldn't play in it, obviously. As far as the continued sampling, that question's come up at pretty much every meeting we've had the past 2 weeks. So I've sent a note over to Tallahassee to find out what the sampling protocol is going to be, or if there's one. I know that UWF is sampling. They've got 2 transects that run out into the Gulf. And I talked with Dick Snyder, who's doing that work, and I don't think they've found anything. I think you guys actually have looked at the new reef. Right, but I'm saying, but Oriskany, and then you've also sampled, I think, the Barrow area. for your. Right, and so I don't think you found anything. So, and when I say I don't find anything, and what NOAA is telling us, and they're basically in charge of the Gulf investigation to see is there other pockets out there, they're not finding anything. I mean, they're finding these clouds, if you will, of dispersed oil, which doesn't look like oil anymore. It's a cloudy kind of biological activity happening. Having said that, you know, we got a good storm come through, and you get these additional impacts that they were talking about earlier. So obviously there's still, you know, some level of oil and tar balls out there. And my guess is we're going to see those continue to come in at a more elevated rate than typically Florida before this event got 500 to 600 tar ball reports a year. Now, when I say tar ball reports, that's tar ball reports. And how many of those are actually confirmed to be tar balls, I don't know. Because when the event happened, we got lots of reports that some of it turned out to be tar from old roads that were washed out in a hurricane and what have you. So I don't know that we'll ever, I mean, if you remember back in the early 70s, you know, I was here. In fact, you're a lot older than me, so you probably were in high school or college by then. But actually probably 13 years into your Gunny County career. But you know, there was tar back then from the Mexican oil spill that happened. And that went away. And, you know, so I think there's going to be a matter of time where the impacts that we see rolling in will diminish and we'll get back to normal, you know, which are, you know, 500 to 600 for all of Florida. And when I say 500 or 600, that's not, you know, Northwest beaches, that's the entire Florida coastline. So, you know, how quickly we're going to get back to that, I don't know. What sampling we're going to do as far as the water quality, we did pre-sampling before we were impacted. We did targeted sampling during the event to see what's happening with the water quality, you know, in the impacted areas. And I'm just not sure what our post meaning post impacts coming in every day. But I'm going to find that out and get that back to y'all. Okay?
My name's Gloria Horning, and I'm the Public Information Officer for Brace Be Ready Alliance, coordinating for emergencies. And I keep hearing about the disbursements, and there's no level of concern. Do we know what's in the disbursements yet? I haven't read that BP has released that information. So how can we know if there's a level of concern if you don't even know what's in it?
What I can tell you is what our folks have been sampling for in Tallahassee is the DOS. And I can tell you there was no Corexit sampling protocol when this event started. In fact, our lab in Tallahassee does not do the actual analysis. We found a lab in Oregon that did the sampling. Basically, what had to be developed was, and again, I'm not the direct expert involved in this every day, so please understand that. In my discussions with Tallahassee, when the dispersant questions came up, you know, repeatedly, we wanted to go ahead and test the waters to say, we don't allow it in Florida, so we're going to say, we were looking for a way to find out, A, were they being used behind our back, or B, did they get over here? So we found a lab in Oregon that had spun up, in other words, developed this method, and all of the sampling that has to be done by an approved EPA method for it to have any credence. Found a lab in Oregon, sent the samples over there, and my guess, because I'm not directly in this, is that they're looking at DOS as an indicator, meaning there's a whole bunch of chemicals in there, and they're looking at DOS as the one that we have in a lab, or we have a method for, that we can analyze for, and that if it's there, then, you know, I'm guessing the assumption is that Corexit might be. Having said that, unfortunately, DOS is also in a lot of other products. So that's the trouble that we get into. You know, was it due to pharmaceuticals? Was it due to paint? Was it due to some other product that has DOS in it? So I can't give you a direct answer to your question other than that's the method that we have been able to use to look for it, and all of our sampling except for those 2 samples that we found on August 16th, I believe it was, I don't have my cheat sheet in front of me, were negative.
Level of concern, when you spoke that, you know, in a fish or some water life that you found, it was not a level of concern. If I eat 12 of them, is it a level of concern? If I eat 100 of them, is it a level of concern? Because a lot of people around here eat that, you know, we eat fish. 7 days a week. So when is it, or will it ever not be a level of concern?
While he's getting that, I am going to mention, if you go to the bp.com website, there's a place on there that has the MSDS sheets on there that show what's in that core exit that was used. So you can find that information out there, and I'm happy to provide my information to you afterwards if you'd like to follow up with me on that.
Okay, I do have something here from the World Health Organization as far as DOS goes, and it has to do with the levels of concern being 500 parts per million in shrimp and 500 parts per million in oysters and 100 parts per million in finfish. And like I said a while ago, those samples that were taken by FDA and NOAA, none of them have even come close to the levels of concern yet. Okay. The other thing is our lab at the Florida Department of Agriculture will begin testing fish samples and other seafood samples probably in January for DOS. To get set up for that is very, very difficult and takes a lot of setup, and you've got to follow the method. Actually, the method for testing DOS was just released from FDA and NOAA just a couple of weeks ago. So our lab is gearing up for that right now, and hopefully sometime in January, we will actually begin testing tissue samples for DOS as well as PAHs. Okay.
Hello, thank you for letting me address you. I'm Barbara Albrecht, and these are nice. They're very shiny. They're good PR, and they seem to be very focused on tourism and seafood industry. A couple of things I'd like to point out. The Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry hosted their 31st annual meeting last week in Portland, Oregon, and there were a number of sessions that were focused on the oil spill. Previous ones from Mexico, the IPTOC, and then also the recent ones that we've had here in the Gulf, and then also the Valdez, looking at the fishery and how that's been impacted. A number of studies have shown that there are developmental problems with juvenile fish and invertebrate species, and that their development is no longer able to develop properly. So there are situations where their fins are not developing, their backbone is not developing. So these samples were run by tar balls that were collected on Florida beaches, and the measurements were collected from there. So I know you're targeting on seafood and what's already grown, whether it's an oyster a year old or whether it's a redfish that's 2 years old, but keep in mind that there are a lot of impacts that we don't really know about that could be happening down the road. BP has been very generous putting money in everybody's pocket, and they've employed a number of people to help clean up the obvious things that are happening. But it would be also really a testament to BP if they would fund some of the potential hatcheries that could come out of this, whereby you take native species and you culture them and release them into our waters when our waters return to what's considered normal. Addressing your water quality concerns as the state of Florida, you just released your recent impaired waters, and you have quite a problem inland. And we have an assault in the Gulf, our basin, and now we have an assault coming down our rivers. You understand that your monitoring inland has been decreased through efforts of citizens' actions like the Brim Fishermen's Association, and I understand you'll be cutting back their monitoring. We'd like to see you restore some of those monitoring programs so that you can continue to have the data set that you have, because Northwest Florida has a large data set based totally on volunteer collections. And so whoever would like to address that, just feel free. Thank you.
Absolutely, with the brim fishermen. I mean, we just let y'all expand on that. As y'all know, our budgets have been continue to be cut just from the state of the economy. DEP's budget keeps getting cut, and we keep losing positions, and we keep losing funding, and unfortunately, we're having to. Well, I understand that. I'll let BP talk next. Hopefully, if they want to augment our state budget, I'm more than happy to, be a beneficiary of that. But the legislature is going to decide that. And but the partnerships absolutely have been huge. And we're doing everything we can to try to continue that level of sampling. And for those of you that don't know, the brim fishermen have probably been doing sampling for us for 20, 30 years. And they go out, and in the beginning, we didn't pay them anything. We didn't pay them gas money, we didn't pay them anything. And they were helping us out build that data set. And that has been huge for us. And then finally we said, we ought to be paying these guys, and we weren't making them rich. We were basically covering the cost of gas, and that's about it. So it has been huge. And environmental protection is a community thing. It's not a DEP. It's not totally a DEP thing or a BP thing, or it's a community. It takes everybody. And so I absolutely agree with you. And we hope to get more money for them and continue that, because I would hate to lose that on that data set. And we'll do the best we can. But again, I can't control what comes into DEP from the legislature, and I don't want to just blame it on the legislature. I mean, our budget, everyone's budget is going down, and so they've got to make decisions. There's more than DEP that they fund, and so we'll do the best we can. You've got my commitment for that. And the partnerships are a big part of leveraging stuff. And Keith will tell you, there's a lot of stuff that Escambia County has been doing, and the city of Pensacola. As far as stormwater protection, and that's a partnership that we put together, and it's bigger than just the county and DEP. We have, I love to talk about Southgate Plaza. It hooks into the Stone Swamp Preserve that the county started, and actually Keith and I 10 years ago came up with a dream to have a Southwest Florida corridor, Greenway, that runs from Bayou Chico over to Tarkland Bayou and then down to Big Lagoon. And the county has been working on it. They've got about half to 3/4 of that in county ownership. And so we are making improvements. I mean, yes, water quality is not as fine as it used to be, but it's a lot better than it was when I was going to high school here. So we are making improvements.
Another thing on the sampling and testing for the 3 years, there's also a clause in that memorandum of understanding between BP and the Department of Agriculture that MOU can be extended for an additional 3 more years, or however long it takes to keep testing and sampling. So it's just not a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year thing. It'll be an ongoing process. Okay.
Hi, Heather Reed, Ecological Consulting Services. For the city, I'm the consultant for the city of Gulf Breeze, and we have been out on the bay the whole summer and observed all the great things and the evolution that you guys have developed and the learning curve. But there's a couple things that I'm not understanding why we haven't gone over a learning curve. For example, water quality. Do you think we really have the technology to determine whether or not the Corexit or oil Corexit mix is there a baseline data for it? Do we have the technology to determine whether or not it is toxic? There are some samples that I had sent off and just basically took some oil and tar balls, had a water quality test done on it. There wasn't a lot of PAH in it, surprisingly. So I'm not sure if we have the technology to determine if there's a baseline. And I know the petroleum companies have done great studies, and there's also something with, you'd mentioned tested oil, and you tested Corexit, or the dispersants. Have you tested the oil and Corexit together? Because studies from the petroleum companies themselves show that the Corexit actually activates and separates some of the components within the oil. So we don't know where it's going. We don't know if it's being absorbed or adsorbed. Has those studies been looked at for the oil and Corexit together in a lab especially? And for the seafood, 174 samples in Pensacola Bay, is that what you were saying? Okay. Have you guys taken tests? I gotcha. Because I was going to say 174 samples isn't a lot to determine, people's safety. are you going to be taking samples of the benthic environment that would possibly be able to, especially when we have our upwelling events and more of our primary production is affected? Will you be taking samples of the benthic environment, the microenvironment, and seeing exactly what the uptake was in the areas of concern that we're getting right now? Okay.
Our samplers don't go out on boats. We're basically getting from the seafood chain, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Well, let's say Barrancas Beach, for example. Are you guys getting lots of
Not unless
samples?
Not unless a commercial fisherman goes out there and catches fish.
Is that
and
right?
takes it to a primary
Okay.
processor.
So you're not having independent people go and pull samples from?
Not at this time.
I gotcha. Okay. So it's commercial fishermen,
Right.
what they catch, whether or not it's safe or not.
Now, FDA and NOAA, they did take a lot of fish samples from private fishermen and for the DOSS.
And what
for
were
the
those
PAH.
results?
Huh?
What were those results?
Those were the same as all
Same
those ones,
thing,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
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 And also, our cold weather is coming up. What I've noticed, and I had pulled the sample from Fort McRae. We pulled it out of the water. It was, it smelled really bad. I was really surprised. I was surprised that it was not weathered. I really expected it to be weathered. I didn't think it would throw me back like that. So there's these little pockets everywhere, and you guys are doing a great job getting it. But in this cold weather, a lot of those components are going to stay preserved. Have you guys looked into the effects of, say, the benthic environment, the fish in those areas in a preserved pocket? Because when we have weathered, I don't think I mean, the beaches, oh, that's weathered. I don't think we have to worry about that. But our bays, if we keep getting this submerged oil that, hey, we don't know about, we just accidentally come across it, and it starts affecting our primary production in our bay. Could you perform a long-term study? I mean, would that be possible, or is it just going to be samples from what people catch? I mean, is it possible that you can establish a baseline? Okay, because we've had a long time in the bay to allow these components to dissolve and possibly get into our system. I'm not saying it is. It's a large surface area. It could easily dilute. I don't know, but it would be a great study for you guys to verify your data. That's what I would think.
One response to the PAH is for those of you who don't understand what that is, that's polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And basically what's happened is the oil was released 75, 80, 100 miles to our west. By the time that oil got to Florida waters, the Gulf had stirred it up, and the stuff that you smell when you're filling up your gas tank, that's the aromatic of the petroleum. The benzene, the toluene, the xylene, that's the aromatics, and those basically have volatilized off before they get here. The samples that we took off of Barrancas didn't have those, and the reason for that, it is weathered. Now, when I say weathering, what you have to remember is this oil has been in water, it's kind of gotten over here, and it's almost like I don't know the best way to explain it, it's almost like a soft shell, on the oil, and the volatiles have all gone away, and then it gets this crusty, kind of like when you have milk sitting in a pan and it gets that little crust on the top. That's basically what you're seeing out there. So the volatiles are gone. And I'm just saying the sampling that we've tasted, we're not seeing any benzene, we're not seeing any xylene, we're not seeing the volatiles. So, if they're there, it's not. Well, there's two different things we're saying here. What I'm saying is the contamination we have not found in the water. We have found it from the tar balls themselves. Now, the long-term effects, because the critters migrate, the plankton go, and I'm not saying anything about that. What I'm saying is the oil, the tar balls that we have gotten here do not have those aromatic components to it, because we can argue, I mean, you can disagree, and I understand that, but I'm telling you, the sampling's not showing it. So that's why you're not seeing that here, is by the time it gets over here, it volatilizes. That's why when you're filling your gas tank and you're smelling those fumes, that's what's happening. Is those more aromatic components are volatilizing off. So.
I guess the frustration, and I sense what Heather's saying, in a sense, is sort of what I was asking was, we're doing a lot of sampling, but we're doing a lot of sampling when we know there's not oil. The question is, why aren't we doing sampling of crabs and other animals in an area like McRae and Barrancas and Pickens, where we know we have oil in the water? I mean, if things are working out well there, then I'm not really worried about the areas where we know we don't have oil. And I think there's a lot of it, and I think I absolutely understand and agree. There are a lot of things which we dodged a very big bullet, and that was very good. And I think things are better than we expected back in May, or feared they may become. Certainly that's a good thing. But I don't understand why we're not doing sampling of critters, whether it's hermit crabs. That's why I asked about doing things, crabs, whatever, somebody that doesn't migrate, pretty much stays in a certain area. And if they're in that area where we know that the submerged oil is, then why don't we take some samples there and find out what's going on with those animals? And that would be good. Second issue is, I forgot to mention, and I realize it's never been done before in the process, the NERDA process, but this spill was so significant of impact that, again, sort of what came up in Fort Walton, I know Keith brought it up, why can't local governments, or at least somewhere, because I think what you're seeing, you're doing these all across because this is where you're getting to the people. Local governments are the most accessible to the people, getting the information out, bringing the questions in. What about bringing them in the process of being trustees in some way or another? And again, I simply throw that out there. I know this isn't we introduced the idea on November 4th, and I think it has some merit to it. And again, I think whatever we sort of went through the process, if you don't engage the local governments, we've seen that breakdown through OPA. And again, that's a separate question, but just that thought process as well.
Maybe you misunderstand what I'm saying. Our sampling was targeted. The water quality samples were taken, the sediment samples were taken, are right next to the oil. And that's to check and see, is the contamination basically getting out of the oil into the water column from where you can see it to where you can't see it? And the answer is no. It's not getting out. The only time we found any trace amounts of petroleum in the actual water, where the water looked clear, was after that tropical storm, when there was a lot of tar balls out there. There was enough agitation which actually allowed some to get into the water column. So I'm not saying we're sampling where there's no impacts, we're taking water samples to say things are great. So that's the first clarification. The second is the twigs that I was telling you about earlier, the technical work groups that are looking at the impacts to resource itself, and Shelley could maybe be a better person to answer, but I know they are out sampling those specific groups. Shelley's on the oyster team. They went out and collected oyster samples to look for impacts. So that work is being conducted. Now, I'm not in that process, so I can't sit here and tell you that we've taken 20 samples off Fort Barrancas of crabs. I don't know that, but maybe Shelley can, and I don't know if you want to come up and speak or not, but Shelley might be able to either in front, right now or later give you an insight as to that technical work group process. But the idea and the concept is to look for impacts within habitat and affected organisms. So I've got to believe, although I can't swear to it, I'm not in the know on that, whether or not they're sampling, off Fort Barrancas for crabs. But I know Shelley has been sampling for oysters in impacted areas, looking to see can they find any contamination in the oysters themselves. As far as the NERDA process and the trustees, I didn't hit that real well earlier. Each governor of each state that has been impacted by the oil spill appoints a trustee to basically it's going to be the people that will negotiate with BP over, or Florida's trustees, we're going to say these are the impacts to Florida. And the governor appointed our general counsel, Larry Morgan, FWC's director, Gil McRae, and then director of CAMA, Coastal and Aquatic Managed Areas, Lee Evanston. They are the three trustees for Florida. Now, whether or not we can convince the governor to put a county rep on there, I don't know. I mean, Larry and you had that discussion, and whether they can make that happen or not, I'm not sure. However, I do agree that through this whole process, communication has been a bear, and every time we get together, this problem comes up, and so I want to work as hard as you do to fix that, and I'm hoping that the solution we came up with, I saw that Bay County looks like they approved it in their board meeting this past week. So I think that's, and just so what you all know, what we came up with, the problem has been, you know, from our side, we try to get the word out, as the commissioner has said, but the counties, and I don't want to speak for you, but what I'm hearing is the counties, you know, feel like maybe we get information, but we really feel like it's more like a, hey, FYI kind of thing, instead of a partner, here's what's happening, let's work together to resolve it. And so whether that's a perceived problem or a real problem, it's still a problem because perception is reality. So we've been looking for ways to have a meaningful seat at the table by the counties so that as we move forward in this NERDA process, which is going to be incredibly important, that we hear from the public, that we hear from the local governments, and that state agencies that are involved, we all have to come together, identify impacts, identify projects that we feel would make things right, and get that list put together and then get that in front of BP and make it happen. So that takes everybody in this room, plus all your neighbors and all your friends. The solution that we came up with is hopefully all the counties are going to come together and form a coalition where they will attack issue by issue as a group and not as individual counties. And DEP will be sitting at the table with them, so when BP hears from them, they'll be actually hearing from Northwest Florida. They're not going to be hearing from Escambia County, Okaloosa, Walton. They're going to hear from Northwest Florida, here's what we want to see happen. And that's going to be a much more powerful voice is the logic behind that. So I think that clarifies your questions, and I agree with you. I mean, we need to make this right and then document how we did it so the next time there's an event or circumstance, we don't have to redo this wheel.
Okay, speaking of communication on our lab tests, is it possible that DEP, NOAA, county, everyone can put their data results on the website? That way scientists can review that, because I don't really think you got the right information, Daryl. I know you're not a chemist and looking, but we took the same sample, and you know the petroleum organics were high, but the only thing that was missing from the DEP report, and it doesn't make it wrong, it's just the report itself did not show the dilution factors. And what that means is this sample had to be diluted 20, and another time it had to be diluted 100 times just to get a reading. So that also means your PAHs were so high, they were undetected. So they couldn't separate out your PAHs. So when I asked for the graph and it showed a big porcupine, that means those PAH levels could not get down to the spectrum that the mass spec was actually looking at. Now, I could be wrong, but it would be helpful if you could have it on a website so people could give their input and it doesn't look like anyone's hiding anything, because I don't really think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of standardization on reports. All the reports should be the same.
I did speak with our chemist, who I know is spent with you, Tim Fitzpatrick, and I think you're mistaken just a little. The dilution factors, the reason they dilute samples are so that the equipment does not get ruined in the process. It does not reflect the actual concentration of the sample, but if you try to put oil directly into a lab piece of machinery, you will hurt the machinery. So they dilute it in order to get a level of product or material in there that's not going to hurt the equipment. That the samples that were run, there were detection limits, and actually all the detection limits were non-detect. You can argue with me, but all of our data, it is on the website, and that was sent to you also. The Scribe website is what EPA has set up, and every water sample that has been taken for BP and for this event is on Scribe. Well, and I've also given you, we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of all the samples. So if you are having difficulty getting the data or getting in a format you need, there's a contact within BP, which I always send out when somebody asks for the data. You know, it's, I can't think of her name at the moment, Kristen Lambert, I think. Anyway, I'll send, anybody that wants it, I'll send an email with the link to Scribe, and that is the database that EPA has set up for all data to be sent to, so they've got a central data set for all data. If anybody doesn't want to ask questions today, has follow-up questions, my cell phone number is 850-232-0276. And feel free to give me a call and answer any other questions. My email, I don't have any cards with me, but my office is right down the street, is Darryl.Boudreau, and that's DARRYL.BOUDREAU @dep.state.fl.us. Feel free, if you didn't get that, just see me after the meeting, I'll give it to you. But feel free to call or email me with any follow-up questions.
There's actually a number of different ways that you can go after the oil and Barrancas, and the reason that they are using the hard hat divers is because that is an incredibly archaeologically sensitive area. There's been incredibly valuable coins, anchors, swords. I mean, there's been a number of things found in that area, and that's the reason that we're going after it there with manual means. Other means that have been tested in other areas so far have been use of track hose, where they are actually scooping it up and putting it into separation tanks. There's vacuum systems. There's a number of different ways that you can go after it. And through SCAT, they actually come up with those recommendations.
When we develop our shoreline treatments, and most of our focus has been on the shoreline. Now, when we start going out further, and we reached out further from the shoreline and developed a crew called the Snorkel Scat Team. And, but they were limited to visibility and a few other things from that near shore, that area there. To go further out, earlier on, a big effort went out to sample through sonars and you know, snares, a few other things, to try to locate submerged oil further out. And we weren't, they could not find or weren't able to locate anything. So, you know, there's a number of technologies. We haven't been able to implement them or even look at them because we really haven't found any that we would really go deep diving for. So our focus right now has been closer to the shore. When we do find them, that's what we've developed the our methods of doing it. And as Floyd said, there's a couple that we currently have documented and put into an operating plan. But right now, the biggest tool we're having is as I mentioned, monitoring the shorelines, and for the breakup because these things are breaking up. These tarmets are breaking up, and as they start coming in, it gives us an indication, especially after a good weather front, that more effort has to be put into that area there to see what we can find those.
If someone else has a question, come on up, but unless y'all don't, I want to follow up a little bit on the STRs. They were talking about the shore-up treatments and the options that get implemented. The way this works is all of the Florida's coastline has been set up into segments, and the reason you do that is you don't want one treatment method to be used all across the panhandle. So we've divided the Florida coastline up into segments, and as oil is identified, depending on what type of impact it is, whether it's sheen, whether it's tar balls, whether it's mats, whether it's on the surface, whether it's buried 2 foot under, the SCAT teams come up with a draft recommendation, which is that STR, shoreline treatment recommendation, on how they would recommend cleaning that area up. That draft then goes to the stakeholders, which is FWC, the county government where that property is, DEP. We all take a look at it and all agree on what is the best method for removing that impact. And it's been made very clear to us that how clean is clean question is like it was before you got here. And so that's been discussed and brought out very clearly by the local county commission, and all the commissions agree with that. But as far as the treatment recommendations, the difficulty is, and I agree with Shelley, I was like, why can't we use a suction dredge to get this stuff up? To me, that's the least impactful to the environment. You don't worry about, with the track hoe, you're obviously digging in sand and coming up. You all done that at the beach and see the nice sand that leaves. So from a suction dredge perspective, you got there with a big hose, you suck it up, no muss, no fuss. But the problem is, archaeological folks also sit at the table. And from their perspective, and Heather, working all your work off of Dead Man's Island, that's a definite method you do not want to use in an archaeological area, because who knows what you may be sucking up with that big suction dredge. So the thing to remember is, no matter what aspect of this cleanup we're talking about, there are a number of people sitting at the table who have different perspectives. You have local government who are concerned about the health and the welfare and the tourism. You have the Department of Environmental Protection that's worried about the environmental quality. You have you have the history folks who are worried about the natural history items that are out there. And so when you add all those seats at the table, what you come up with is the best scenario that you can, given everybody's concern. And they're all valid concerns. There's none that are over anybody else's. They are all concerns. And what gets ultimately implemented is what everyone agrees, yes, in this case, this is the best method.
How do you do? My name is Peter Crocker. One of my concerns is the language that we use. We refer to this as a spill. To me, it was a disaster that was avoidable due to negligence and greed. I don't know who works for SCAT. Can we employ Escambia County people for SCAT? I don't know how TWIG works. Can you employ TWIG people that work in Escambia County? I do not trust BP. I do not trust the oil system. I do not trust the government that allowed this to happen. So when these tests are being done and none of my local people are doing it, none of my local friends are getting jobs, I have people that would love to clean Johnson Beach, but they're told they can't because BP is handling it. Well, they handled everything. Can we create a trust fund? BP would have to fund it, so 10, 15 years from now, when all the flare has died down, when all the publicity has gone away, like Exxon Valdez, I'm still afraid to swim. I haven't been to the Gulf since. I can't even swim where I live on Inverarity Point. How do we create a trust fund so in 10 or 15 or 20 years, my grandchildren aren't afraid to go swimming? You know, once the SLIC campaign ends, how can the local people be given charge of testing and utilization of our own waterways, not the government and the machine always doing it? Thank you.
I don't know why you're looking at me. Anyway, I'm an oil spill response technician. I do not work for BP, though I am working for BP at this particular time. But the unified command, which is federal government, state government, a group of your representatives that are running, that are basically managing the spill, as developed in the National Contingency Plan, which is developed for the protection of us for environmental issues. Shoreline cleanup treatment assessment, shoreline cleanup assessment technique teams are comprised of various stakeholders, federal government, state government, which includes NOAA, Coast Guard, yes, BP, also any interested party that is trained for that assessment of the beaches, of the shoreline. It's not a gathering of people that just want to get involved. It's a technology. It's what we're trying to get. We're trying to understand. We're trying to make better by good factual information. And those are professional technical teams they're gathering that. They work worldwide. I mean, trust or whatever. I do know, in all my years of spill response, that they are some of the best people that have been hired, that have been brought into this, to assess that and to develop that and to determine what are the best treatments.
We had two of our people that have, for the past, I want to say 4 or 5 years, been building oyster reef, salt marsh, and seagrass areas in Pensacola. We've also had one of those people have been building oyster reefs and collecting oyster shell from local restaurants. He's been with us for probably 5 years. The lady that I'm speaking of has actually been in your local schools with your local kids growing plants for restoration projects for the past 2 or 3 years. Those two individuals now are full-time employed by our Bureau of Emergency Response, and they are the SCAT team for the state of Florida. So I can't answer your question any better than that. They're local, I'm sorry? No, SCAT teams are funded by BP. The SCAT teams are going to be here as long as the impacts are being documented, and we will be documenting them as long as we're seeing them. This is not something that's going to go away in a year. This is going to continue until the impacts are over and everyone agrees that they are over. And in Tampa Bay, I can't tell you 5 years, 10 years, I can't answer that because I'm not, I don't have a crystal ball, and I cannot tell you in 7 years, in the summer of 2017, we're done. No one knows that. Now, what I can tell you is that I am going to be here as long as I am employed by the state of Florida, working with this. And I can tell you that I've seen no indication from BP that, okay, we got 12 months left. I'm not hearing that. I'm not seeing that. Not changing. They might change their tune down the road, but I'm not seeing it. And in answer to your first question, it is local people that are on those SCAT teams, and I don't know that anybody that I would say to you cares more about the environment that someone has been willing at an OPS salary for $11 an hour to be, working for us without benefits. So I trust them and their integrity completely. I mean, hope that answers your question. And I agree with you, but the question that you're talking about, their times, the 15 minutes work and 45-minute break, that's not driven locally. That was driven by, BP would get in trouble. No, sir. What I'm saying is that's OSHA requirements. And that OSHA requirements apply to whether you're on the beach or whether you are over at Gulf Power next to a boiler. There are environmental conditions by which OSHA says we are only going to allow you this amount of time in this kind of an environment, and then you must take a break. And if a company says we're going to ignore that and we're going to go do something else against that, they will end up in court. And I'm just telling you that's the way it is. I mean, it's a frustration, yes. Well, I understand, but people in the government are people, is what I'm trying to tell you. And I do not question the integrity of the people we have on our SCAT teams one iota. They have worked for what I consider minimum pay with zero benefits for years for us because they care about the environment. And I try to get them to come into the state government and work doing permits or doing compliance assistance. They choose not to because they want to restore Pensacola's environment. I trust that integrity. Those are the people that are on the beach representing the state of Florida looking for impacts. I trust them.
My name's Alan Dennis. I live at 16401 Perdita Key Drive, and about 300 yards from the crab trap where they do a lot of moving in the equipment every day. And if you walk out on my beach right now, there's certainly there's tar balls that are washing in, and that's to be expected. But the beach itself probably has, it'd be difficult to measure, but I would say tens of thousands of pea-size tar balls. And I guess my question is, are they waiting to get that up when they go deeper? Are they thinking it's going to just go away? I also served as a wildlife coordinator, and I know that when we were running full blast, we had 600 people on day shift. We had 125 people on night shift. I don't see any of those kinds of numbers anymore out there cleaning the beaches. So I guess what I'm asking, are we at a different stage of the game now that we're going to a different technology, a different protocol, a different way of doing business? Or are we just scaling back the whole operation and just saying, well, So I'd like an answer to that question if I could.
All right, as far as the scaling of the equipment and personnel, the current screens that we're going with are the 3mm screens in order to bring it down. There's also tests that are being run right now. The STRs are in the approval loop for doing the tilling and washing, surf washing, and various other methods of getting it off, as well as the actual manual crews that are going down in like a picket line formation to pick stuff up. And the requirement in your area is no visible above background, and that is, we're not leaving that area for sure. I mean, we're continuing to clean there, and although we are going through right now with the submerged, we're trying to get this deep stuff up, because what good is it to take away that surface if we've just got to bring it all back up anyway? So the goal is to get it out from underneath and then to come across the top and put that finishing polish on there, get all the rest of that off. Does that answer your question?
Keith has told me, thank you all very much for coming here today and spending some time with us. Certainly there is some emotion that is here, but that's only because we love the place. If we didn't have that passion for it, there wouldn't be the emotion that goes with it. I think you understand, and I believe the gentleman in rarity sort of gets back to the point that I've said a long time. You will continue to have suspicions if you do not involve the local governments. And I think that's the problem that we felt left out throughout the process and why we think we need to be involved in the process. But I know that we've got a time crunch and we were going to get you out of here by 3:30. At this particular time, I think that we'll be ending today. We appreciate you being here. I've been told that hopefully as these things continue to move forward, we may have to do this again. And I see Keith, and he was just talking to me about doing that again, and also hoping that if somebody has questions afterwards, they can write them down. There's somewhere, perhaps, maybe we can get an email from the individuals that are here that we could forward questions out to and get you to respond back, reply to all, sort of, so everybody can see what those answers are. If we could continue to do that, we certainly appreciate it. The last thing I'll say is, and again, I think it's vitally important on two counts, and this more goes to Liz and to BP, is as these things are going forward and these processes are happening, we really need to be aware both from an environmental standpoint, but also an economic diversification, helping us economically, is some of those research dollars need to come here locally to UWF, and we should be using the resources that are available to us here. And that makes a huge difference in what happens in this community, because we have taken a tremendous economic hit and we need assistance keeping things here. There's plenty of things that can be done here. There are things that people are looking to do here. And I think that's some of the frustration that you're hearing also, is that we would like to see more things happen here rather than seeing them happening somewhere else. And I'll end with that, as I know there are some things that we've been putting together in our county and municipality plans, trying to look for opportunities to assist both with the recovery, both environmentally and economically, and how we position those things going forwards. But again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and again, thank you for all the work that you're doing to continue to help us. We're all trying to work together, but again, it's one thing. Don't forget the locals that are here. That's a big part of it. We just need to feel like we've got that communication both with the government and the citizens, and we appreciate all the citizens being out here today and coming here with your questions. So thank you for being here.
If I could one more time, I know some people came in late. My cell phone, 850-232-0276. My email is darryl.boudreau, BOUDREAU, @dep.state.fl.us. And one last thing, I'm a citizen in this area as well. I grew up here, I was educated here, I went to school here. My grandson was born January 4th here. This is my home. I'm in DEP because I care about the environment. It's what I chose to make my life in, not what I make my money in, trust me. So when you again, I'm not asking for your trust. I have to earn that, and I don't know if I ever will. But I'm not lying to you. Everything I'm telling you is the truth. And I understand that, ma'am. But what I want you to understand is when people make points and they say, they can't believe what we're saying, maybe you can't believe me, but I'm not lying to you. I grew up here. I'm fighting every day to leave this place better when I pass away than when I found it. And actually, I'm making improvements on that because my throat doesn't get burned anymore when I go canoeing. So we are making progress. So I just want to thank everybody, and feel free to call me or email me if you have questions.
Thank you very much. You may be able to catch someone out in the lobby and ask more questions, continue the discussions. Thank you.